Hello, my name is Alexei Alexeyevich Zanchkovsky. I'm a Russian. I attend Holy Resurrection Church in Vancouver, Canada. I have been a member of this church since 2004, and I live in Birch Bay, Washington. I used to live in the southern part of the United States for 30 years when I was employed, and there were no Russian churches, nor were there any Russians anywhere where I lived. So when I retired, I came up to the Northwest, because this is where I have had a home in the 50s. I should say that I came with my brother Nikolai to Canada from China, from Shanghai, China. My father was working for the Chinese customs in Canton, and that's where we were born, in Canton, China. And then in 1934, the family moved to Shanghai, and we were in Shanghai to the early 50s. But after the communists came into China, we decided to leave China and come to Canada as immigrants. My brother and I came to Canada, to Vancouver, Canada, in 1951, October 51, and immediately entered the University of British Columbia, because my father insisted on us to getting good education. So my father and my mother and my younger sister, Tanya, came 2 years later in 1953. My sister, oldest sister, Olga, came in 1950 to Canada. So the whole family was essentially left China and ended up in Western Canada, in Vancouver. So going back to me as a member of this church, of course, in Shanghai, we had some beautiful Russian churches, several of them, as a matter of fact, including cathedral. And my father used to take us to church, and that was my introduction to my religion. And at the same time, I was able to compare this with Catholicism, because I went to a Catholic church in Shanghai. That's where my father sent me. And the language was English, so we only spoke Catholic school. And even though we spoke Russian at home, in school we had to speak English. So I was able to compare the Catholic rites versus the Orthodox rites, and the Orthodox rites is a lot more interesting. I thought there's no comparison. Our church services are very, very, very nice. So when I rejoined this church in 2004, after I came back up here, I was happy to see a lot of newly arrived Russians in Vancouver, and happy to see a new priest in the church that spoke Russian, which made me very happy to have a Russian-speaking priest. Several years after I've been here, I met my future wife, Anastasia, also known as Gloria, and we got married. And I guess my father always wanted me to marry a Russian girl, so I did finally. Anyway, so to talk something about the priests over here, I known Father Michael ever since he came to this parish. So he's a very nice person, and I really like him, and I really think he's very valuable for this parish. Not only for his hard work and his dedication, but his concern for the spiritual needs of the Russian people. And
his whole family is a part of the church, so it's so nice.
yes, and his wife and his kids come to church service, and it's nice to see a family in church, the whole family. Also, I remember Father Andrei. When I first saw him, first in his robes and in church, I says, "Oh my God," I said, "this is like Shanghai." He looked like a typical Russian priest, you know, that it's hard to find these days, at least in this part of the world. So I really liked Father Andrei. He was a very sincere man. He was strict. He was a true Orthodox priest, no nonsense priest. And I like that about him. Also, we met the Archbishop Seraphim when he came for his annual trip to this church. I liked him. At first I thought he was Russian, and he looked Russian, but some people told me he was not Russian, but that's okay. I found him very friendly. He was quite jovial and talkative, very friendly, easy to talk to, you know. He was not a snob. He'll hear you out, you know. And I'm sorry that that he had to go through some legal problems, and he was replaced by another bishop in the interim period. I hope things work out for him. Also, I met Father, what's his name, McClucky? James McClucky, and he was a fine young priest, spoke very good English, and he was a very nice man. I really liked talking to him. And then there was Father Slipko that assisted Father Michael in the Mass. I liked him. He did his part in English, and Father Michael did it in Russian, which was good for the non-Russian speaking congregation in the church. I thought that was a good combination. I sort of miss him at the Mass right now. Going to my ancestry, you were wondering what I was doing in Shanghai, how I got there. Well, my father was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, 1894, and he entered the Naval College. He became a lieutenant in the Russian Navy. Unfortunately, the revolution caught up with him, and he was sent out to Vladivostok, and in Vladivostok, as a naval officer, he was training seamen in a naval college out there for a while, and then when the Bolsheviks moved in on Vladivostok, he could not swear allegiance to them because of his religious beliefs and his oath of office. He decided to leave Russia, and so in 1920 he went into Manchuria. He had no money, so things were tough for him. Then he started to learn the English language from scratch. He didn't know a single word of English. And worked here and there. He worked on ships as a second officer, sailing between Shanghai and Hong Kong as a second mate on a passenger ship. And finally, he found himself a job with the Chinese customs in Canton. He also fell in love with my mother, and they got married in Canton. After about 3 years in Canton, we moved to Shanghai. So in Shanghai, he still worked. He was promoted to a position in the Chinese customs in Shanghai, and he really liked his job, and they really liked him, and he was promoted, and he did very well for a Russian in China. Most of the Russians in China were poor, and he was able to get up a little bit higher than most of them, financially speaking. I guess through his naval ability, his knowledge of navigation and all this served him very well when he worked for the Chinese customs. He knew what he was talking about. And his ancestors, of course, is interesting too, because I like to do genealogy. And he never told me anything about his past. And I found out that he was a member of the Russian nobility from Tver province. And then I found out about my mother's nobility. She was a German baroness from Kurland, Latvia. And then finally, in the year 2000, I found out a very famous Russian was my great-great-grandfather, and his name was Nikolai Alexandrovich Bestuzhev. So I decided to go to Siberia in 2002 and meet some of my distant cousins, descendants of Bestuzhev in Vladivostok, and then we went to Selenginsk. We went to the museum of Bestuzhev there. We visited his gravesite and various other places. It was very interesting for me. I really enjoyed that voyage. I have a lot of pictures. And someday I'll bring them along and show you. All in all, I like to conclude my speech by saying that I'm glad there is a Russian church in Vancouver, and I'm glad to be part of the attendees. My hobbies are traveling, photography, genealogy, and history. And every time my wife and I go to Russia, we always have to go inside a Russian cathedral, and we always place a candle before we leave and say a prayer. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
So maybe I'll say just a few words. I just wanted to say that we are doing this interview to help commemorate the 90th anniversary of Holy Resurrection, Russian Orthodox Sabor. It is my honor and privilege to have been with this church since 1997, and I worked closely with Father Andrei Somov and Father Michael Furok. And I was part of the church when we changed from the Holy Resurrection, from the Russian Orthodox Society, no, Russian Society to the Holy Resurrection Church. And that was a very important event. I just would like to see that the church continue, and I'm very happy to see so many young families attending Holy Resurrection, and I hope that will continue for many years. Thank you.